Welcome to the story behind the creation of Rust, one of the world's most famous survival sandbox games. Long before millions of players were scavenging and building in its harsh wilderness, Rust began as a humble idea and a friendly bet between two gamers. This is a tale of how Rust came to life, how an experimental project grew into a phenomenon, why it was created, who sparked its development, and the challenges the creators faced along the way. It's a journey filled with creativity, unexpected success, setbacks, and ultimate triumph. Sit back as we explore how Rust was born and how it became the game that defined a genre for years to come. The origin of Rust can be traced back to early 2013 with two friends at its core, Garry Newman and Maurino Berry. Garry Newman was already known in the gaming world as the creator of the hit Sandbox, Garry's Mod, and the founder of the British indie studio Facepunch Studios' Cobalt Lab.tech. His close friend, Maurino Berry, often known by the nickname Helk, shared Garry's passion for games. At the time, both of them were engrossed in playing the popular DayZ, a gritty multiplayer zombie survival game. During one of their DayZ sessions, Maurino made a bold remark. He claimed he could create an even better version of that game. Instead of laughing it off, Garry showed interest. The idea of making their own survival game was too intriguing to ignore. That moment lit the spark for Rust. With Garry's experience and Maurino's determination, the duo started brainstorming. They envisioned a game that combined DayZ's survival tension with the creative freedom of Minecraft's crafting and building. In Garry's words, Rust started off as a DayZ clone, but then we decided that we are sick of fighting zombies and can't compete with the Arma Islands, so it's more of a stalker kind of world where you build your own buildings. From the very beginning, they wanted player freedom to be the core. There would be no hand-holding morality systems. Rust would let players decide how to survive, whether by banding together or betraying each other. This philosophy was clear even in early development. Our job is to give players the tools to protect themselves. The player makes their own story. Newman wrote, perhaps even more surprising than the idea itself was the speed at which it progressed. Working with minimal resources and a lot of improvisation, Garry and Maurino managed to produce a working prototype in about 6 months. Maurino, serving as the project lead, coded furiously, while Garry contributed his expertise in the backing of Facepunch. They borrowed whatever assets they could manually. 3D models, weapons, animals, etc. were bought from the Unity asset store or hastily made by hand. The project was truly indie at heart, no big budget, no publisher, just two friends experimenting. Early development. From web prototype to Steam, the very first incarnation of Rust was as unpretentious as it gets. The initial prototype ran in a web browser using Unity web player. Players could only access it by purchasing a key on the old website, oldplayrust.com. In these early days of mid-2013, Rust was little more than a testbed, but it was playable and intriguing enough to attract a small community of curious players. Encouraged by this, the developers soon transitioned from a browser game to a standalone client as the player count grew, a sign that their little experiment was evolving into a serious project. Throughout 2013, Rust changed rapidly with frequent updates. By November 2013, the team launched a new official site, playrust.com, and was posting regular update logs. The game already featured some survival basics. Firearms and medkits were present. A hunger system and radiation had been introduced, and the user interface was taking shape. Yet Rust in 2013 was a very primitive version of what it would become. To paint a picture of Rust's early state, in those days, players smelted metal ore in simple campfires, no furnaces yet, and player models didn't even visually change when naked. Supposedly unclothed character looked like a soldier in default clothing. There were only a few guns, and due to glitches, other players would always see you holding either a pistol or an M-Cherry rifle, no matter what you actually had equipped. Bugs and exploits were everywhere. Item duplication glitches. Seeing through walls to spy on stashes, walking through locked doors, the list was endless. In fact, there was even a drivable car in the earliest build, a leftover model from Unity's stock assets. It did work, albeit very briefly, before being removed because it didn't fit the gameplay. The developers were constantly whack-a-moling issues. Every patch fixed some bugs, but introduced others. And yet, despite the rough edges, something about Rust captivated its initial players. The game was extremely bare bones and brutally unforgiving, but that added to its charm. Surviving in Rust felt atmospheric, and hardcore, keeping your shack from being raided overnight, was a real achievement. Interestingly, in those early days, there were essentially no cheaters. The player base was so small that making cheats wasn't worth the effort, and thus everyone was on equal footing. It was, in hindsight, a golden era of innocence for Rust, soon to be transformed by massive popularity. Crucially, word of mouth and online videos started to drive Rust's popularity. Streams on Twitch and YouTube videos from early adopters showed off this strange new survival game, drawing more people, and moreover, Rust got an initial boost thanks to Garry Newman's existing fan community. Many who loved Garry's mod were eager to try anything Garry made next at the time. The multiplayer survival genre was nearly empty aside from DayZ and its Arma 2 mod. And Minecraft, there wasn't much else Rust managed to hit this niche at the perfect moment. And its early success would soon inspire a wave of similar games from other developers. By late 2013, Facepunch was ready to open the floodgates. On December 11, 2013, Rust launched on Steam Early Access. Garry and his team didn't anticipate what happened next. They figured they might get a modest uptick in players after all. The game was still rough and many interested players had already been playing via the website. Instead, Rust became an overnight sensation on Steam. In the first 2 weeks, over 150,000 copies of Rust were sold. The demand was so high that by early 2014, it had sold over 1 million units, astonishing for an early access indie game. At one point in January 2014, Rust shot up to become the #1 top-selling game on Steam and stayed at the top for a notable period. The numbers kept climbing. Roughly 2 months after release, Rust had crossed the 1 million sales mark, and the revenue was pouring in. By February 21, 2014, Garry Newman revealed that Rust had already earned 40% of what Garry's mod made in 9 years, roughly over $20 million USD in just a few weeks. Garry's mod had been a slow burn success over almost a decade, and Rust achieved nearly half of that lifetime success virtually overnight. At its peak in early 2014, Rust's concurrent player count reached about 59,000 players online at once, a massive number for a game that wasn't even finished. Everyone, including the developers, was stunned. Rust's meteoric rise was both exciting and terrifying for Facepunch. Garry Newman openly admitted they had not expected such success and were caught unprepared. The original plan had been to follow a Garry's mod-like trajectory, Fulmer, Greece. The game gathered maybe 20-30,000 players, and then slowly improve it over a few years instead. Rust's launch was like winning a gold medal at the start of a marathon. An immediate triumph that ironically brought more pressure suddenly. Two developers found themselves with a huge player base begging for updates, and a spotlight shining brightly on their unfinished game. The influx of funds ensured the studio's financial security, but it also meant expectations were sky high. Garry later reflected that alongside the money came a huge burden of responsibility. Their little project had grown up much faster than anticipated. It's worth noting what Rust's gameplay looked like when all these players flocked to it, because it was still very much an alpha. At the time of the Steam release, Rust offered a fairly minimal set of features. There were some basic enemies. Originally, zombies roamed the landscape. 2 types of zombie models. Alongside wild animals like wolves and bears, players had access to a handful of guns and explosives, could gather resources, and build rudimentary shelters with wood or metal building pieces. The world had a day-night cycle, about 40 minutes day, 20 minutes night, and a single static map. A pre-made island with a few points of interest scattered around were 3 so-called ratons, small abandoned settlements with loot and radiation zones. 1 small, 1 medium, 1 large, plus a few basic loot sites like a lone fuel tank or hangar. Radiation was a factor in certain areas, forcing players to gear up or take damage. And of course, there was PvP. Players could and often would fight each other for survival, which became the central focus of the game. Airdrops would occasionally parachute in supplies, sparking skirmishes over the goods. By modern standards, none of this was extraordinary. In fact, many mechanics were placeholders and poorly balanced. For example, it was much easier to build an impenetrable fort than to raid one. Tilting risk-reward, The AI on zombies and animals was rudimentary, often posing little real challenge. Glitches were plentiful, optimization was poor. And yet, new players loved it. Why? Because the core experience of Rust was unique. There was a raw, almost social experiment quality to it. A world with minimal rules where the greatest threat was other players' tension was high. You never knew if the stranger on the road would help you or kill you. Voice chat added an immediate human element, leading to either hilarious interactions or terrifying confrontations. Early adopters have recounted how Rust, even in its broken state, was immensely engaging. The combination of atmosphere, cooperation, or betrayal, intense raids, and the promise that this is only the beginning made the game feel special. Every new player logging in was effectively signing up for an unpredictable story, and that emergent storytelling is what made Rust stand out from other games at the time. Facing this unexpected success, the developers scrambled to both expand the game and fix its most glaring issues. Post-launch in early 2014, Facepunch rolled out a series of updates. Visually, they improved the game's look with a better skybox, denser grass, and experiments with adding rivers and lakes to make the island feel more alive. In terms of gameplay, they introduced new items like a revolver, beds for respawn points, window bars for base defense, and durability for weapons and tools with repair mechanics. The game was slowly becoming richer. One major design decision in this period was to distance Rust from the typical zombie survival trope. Zombies had been added as a quick fix enemy early on, but as Rust's player base grew, the devs felt zombies didn't really fit their game, and comparisons to DayZ were drawing focus away from Rust's unique elements. So in February 2014, they removed zombies entirely and replaced them with mutant red wolves and bears as the hostile PvE creatures functionally. These new creatures behaved much the same. In fact, they were jokingly referred to as zombie animals. But the change sent a message: Rust isn't a zombie game. We did it so that people stop comparing Rust to other zombie gun games, because Rust wasn't that. Garry explained, the zombies in Rust never had the kind of gameplay importance they did in DayZ or other titles in Rust. The true danger came from humans. Garry reassured fans that the red animals were temporary stand-ins and that in the future we'll have more. In terms of NPC variety, to brainstorm what that could be, Facepunch even pulled the community ideas ranged wildly from robots to dinosaurs to magical creatures. It was an exciting time and players felt like big changes were imminent. Little did they know, the biggest changes would actually happen under the hood. Rust's explosive growth, unfortunately, had a dark side. With tens of thousands of players flocking to the game, it became a prime target for cheaters and hackers. By early 2014, the cheat problem in Rust had spiraled out of control. Game's popularity made it lucrative for cheat makers to sell hacks, and Rust's infrastructure was ill-equipped to stop them. At that time, Rust relied largely on Valve's anti-cheat system VAC, but had no custom anti-cheat of its own and numerous vulnerabilities due to the Unity engine and the game's young codebase. Soon, there were wall hacks, aimbots, no-clip flying cheats, you name it. For honest players, it became increasingly frustrating to invest hours in gathering resources and building a base, only to have a cheater swoop in and destroy everything effortlessly. Facepunch tried to fight back. They issued waves of bans. Thousands of cheaters were banned in short order and worked on cheat detection, but it was a losing battle. The developers lamented that every server had cheaters. Even the official ones, the skilled cheat developers, could always find new ways around detection, and new cheats popped up as fast as others were fixed. In Garry's own words, despite constant bans all servers were, one way or another, plagued by cheaters, it was impossible to find a server without them. The situation got so dire that some players gave up until things improved. Garry Newman famously expressed his frustration by saying, "We want to be making a game, not an anti-cheat for the game." It was a clear sign that their small team was overwhelmed by the administrivia of policing cheaters when they would rather focus on development. However, an even bigger issue loomed beneath the cheating problem: Rust's code itself. The decision to reboot Rust wasn't just bold, it was necessary. By early 2014, the developers realized that the original version, later known as Rust Legacy, had reached a dead end. The code was chaotic, unstable, and filled with so many issues that every update seemed to break something else. Instead of evolving, the game was collapsing under its own weight. So Facepunch made the radical choice. Start Rust completely from scratch. They created a separate branch called Rust Experimental and began rewriting the entire game, line by line. Everything was rebuilt. The interface, the systems, the mechanics, the optimization, tasks that once required 3,000 lines of messy code could now be done in 100. For the first time, the team could focus on creating content instead of constantly fixing the past. During this transition, the developers kept the old legacy servers running, but they stopped updating them. Many players didn't understand why. Some complained, some demanded fixes, some doubted the new direction entirely. To regain trust, Facepunch started publishing weekly dev blogs. These transparent updates showed the community real progress, new systems, new graphics, new mechanics. Slowly, even skeptics began to believe in the reboot. Rust Experimental wasn't just an improved version of the old game, it was a completely new experience. The team tested new perspectives and mechanics, rebuilt the UI with modern tools, streamlined the codebase, reworked nearly every gameplay system. The most groundbreaking change was the introduction of procedurally generated worlds. Instead of one static map that everyone memorized, each server could now have a unique island with its own mountains, rivers, forests, and coastlines. Later, handcrafted maps like Happy's Island were added as well, but procedural generation gave Rust infinite replayability. Once the foundation was rebuilt, Rust began to grow rapidly. New features arrived one after another. Improved building, stability systems, farming, electricity, vehicles, better combat, NPCs, missions, monuments, and more. Many of these ideas were impossible in Legacy's outdated architecture, but Rust's transformation wasn't instant. In 2014, Rust Experimental often looked rough and incomplete. Graphics were missing, animations were temporary, and entire mechanics hadn't been rebuilt yet. Some players insisted that Legacy was better, asking the developers to just fix the bugs, instead of reinventing the whole game. Yet update by update, the new Rust evolved. Every month brought noticeable improvements, new environments, new systems, better visuals, smarter NPCs, and a more stable world. Slowly but surely, Rust Experimental not only caught up to Legacy but surpassed it on every level. The decision to rebuild the game from the ground up, once controversial, now looked like the smartest move Facepunch had ever made. By late 2014, the new Rust had grown into something entirely different. A world that felt alive. The lighting was improved, terrain generation became more realistic, and the engine upgrade to Unity 5 brought shadows, reflections, and atmosphere that Legacy could never achieve. The developers finally had the freedom to shape Rust into the brutal, chaotic, and unpredictable survival game they always envisioned. And then came the turning point. In October 2014, Rust Experimental officially replaced Legacy as the main version of the game. The old Rust was left behind, and the new era began. For some players, this was the moment everything clicked. Rust was no longer a broken prototype. It was becoming a legendary survival experience. And in the end, Rust's journey became a story about more than survival mechanics, base building, or monthly updates. It became a story about evolution, about a game that refused to stay the same. From a broken prototype held together with hope and duct tape, to a full remake that risked everything, to a global phenomenon shaping the entire survival genre. Rust proved that sometimes you have to wipe everything to build something greater. The developers took the same lesson players learn every week. You can't fear starting over. You rebuild, you adapt, you improve, and you keep moving forward. Today, Rust stands as one of the most ambitious and enduring survival games ever created. Millions of players log in not just to gather, fight, raid, or survive, but to create stories, unpredictable, chaotic, hilarious, tragic, unforgettable stories that no other game can replicate. And that's the magic of Rust, a game where the world resets, but the memories don't. A game where every wipe is a new beginning, where every player shapes the world in their own way, where every moment has the potential to become a legend told years later. Rust was born from a risky decision, rebuilt on a stronger foundation, and carried forward by a passionate community that refuses to let the game die. This is Rust's legacy, And as long as players keep spawning on the beach with nothing but a rock and a dream, its story will keep going. Thanks for watching, and remember, every ending in Rust is just the start of the next wipe.